Welcome to the HR Chat Show, one of the world's most downloaded and shared podcasts designed for HR pros, talent execs, tech enthusiasts, and business leaders. For hundreds more episodes and what's new in the world of work, subscribe to the show, follow us on social media, and visit hrgazette.com.
Welcome to another episode of the HR Chat Show. Hello, listeners. This is your host today, Bill Banham. And in this conversation, we're going to focus on the concept of what it means to be crisis ready in the workplace and the benefits for leaders, for employees, and for the organization as a whole. And back on the show after far too long is none other than Dr. Bill Howatt.
Thanks for inviting me back. Yeah, it's been a bit.
It's been a while. Okay, so the focus of this conversation today is around this idea of being crisis ready, being ready to handle what's being thrown at you. Is my wee summation there. We'll get into the details shortly. And the motivation is you have just recently launched a new program called Crisis Ready. That's with yourself, and the other face of the program is Todd Humber, who certainly our Canadian listeners, I'm sure, will be pretty familiar with. He's a bit of a name when it comes to HR media in Canada and more widely in North America, I think. So let's start there. Just take a couple of minutes, if you don't mind, and sort of give our listeners an overview of you, your background, why this is important to you, and also why you partnered with Todd.
Sure. Yeah. Thanks. So I won't go into a whole bio, but I'll just kind of, I've been playing around in the workplace mental health space for quite a few years. And one of the areas I'm being really focused on is capacity building in organizations and around helping capacity building. So one of my motivations is I do a lot of work with HR professionals. And when I look, for example, the HR certifications and the training, what people are getting, benefits training and different things on how to do performance management, etc. The thing that I kept getting asked about helping people is dealing with workplace crisis, challenges in the workplace. And and with that is psychological health and safety, and with that is safe and respectful workplaces, and with that would be, workplace mental health and how to deal with employees at risk and all those kind of things. And so I talked to Todd Humber, and Todd and I know each other back for many, many years when I was chief of research at it used to be called Morneau Chappelle, now it's TELUS, focusing on workplace areas. We did some work when he was all the way back at Thomson Reuters. That's where I met him, and we did some work on safe and respectful workplace. And we actually, Dr. Mabusker and I published a document. So I've always had a relationship with Todd around dealing with, challenges in the workplace and crises and respect and all that. So when Todd and I were recently talking about HR News Canada and HR Law Canada, what he's doing, we just had a chat one day. It was simply as that. We just had a chat one day and said, what do we think's missing? And we conceived this idea called Crisis Ready Workplace. And I piloted this program that I developed at a couple of large organizations and then the federal government. And what we realized is that there's an opportunity. So we decided to partner, and we created www.crisisready.ca, and we created this program to help folks be ready to deal with interpersonal crisis in the workplace, not to become experts, Bill. It's just to get folks ready. And I feel, and without being long-winded, which I'm good at sometimes, is that you take all your experience into this too, right? So I've taken a lot of mental health experience and clinical practice and applied practice. So it's not a bunch of theory. It's really applied tools. We want people to have tools.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the HR Chat Podcast. If you enjoy the audio content we produce, you'll love our articles on the HR Gazette. Learn more at hrgazette.com. And now, back to the show.
Okay, and big shout out to Todd. We'll be sure to include you in the socials as well. So there we go. Okay, so obviously, if people want to get into the nitty gritty, the finer details, they just have to sign up. But let's start with a bit of an overview, if you
Sure.
don't mind.
Sure.
Can you run through, because it's broken, the program's broken into a number of modules, of course. Maybe you can give us an overview of each of those modules and how leaders can maybe integrate some of those within their decision making processes.
Yeah, well, it's a good test for me. Can I remember all 8 modules? But I can tell you from a high level what it is. So we start the course off around what I believe is your foundational information. It's helpful to understand, the factors that will influence and can lead to crises in the workplace or increased stress. And one of those that is going to be a factor on how effective you are in it is you. So we begin with around the individual readiness to actually deal with crisis. In other words, if someone is like, if a patient came and saw me and they had an issue and they were, it was really, really stressful, and I reacted and stood up and started to walk around my chair and go, oh, I can't believe it. I mean, and I couldn't manage it, or I started breaking down and I couldn't cry, which is as a natural response. But you probably want your professional to be able to manage it, because we get trained to deal with this. And not that there's anything wrong with that, but you probably want me to be calm, like a heart surgeon. You don't want them to be nervous, so there's a certain amount of readiness for you to be your own self-care, how you manage your own emotions. And then it's important to understand what psychological safety really means in regards to the environmental factors that could be contributing to stress load, that could be antecedents, root cause, that could be triggering crises. And a lot of how people are dealing with stress can create the reactivity. Then we'll cover off topics around what a trauma-informed workplace means, and understand the relevance of what trauma is and how that can actually show up in the workplace. And it can actually, some people, because of traumatic responses, can actually come off as if they're not caring about other human beings, but that might be their strategies of how they're coping. And then we'll move through and we'll talk about things about how to deal with workplace mental health issues, including impairment in the workplace. We'll talk about anger, how to deal with an employee's anger. We'll talk about how to deal with someone at risk for suicide. And one of the most important modules, in my opinion, in the program, and I guess I have a pretty good one since I wrote it, is crisis management framework, a basic, simple model for. You can't prepare for every crisis, but to give a person a framework of, I'm in crisis and something I've never dealt with before, a 6-step model to navigate it. And the goal of this whole program, Bill, is not to provide people with a framework that they get a certificate. We have accredited this through CBD, actually in the UK, CBD International. And we have CEUs and all that to give people a real credential. But we really want people to realize we're not trying to make them crisis experts. We're trying to give them tools so that they feel they can move towards challenging situations and have a sense of what they can do. And one of the things I often use is like a defibrillator on the wall. They're great that employers have them, but if employees don't know how to use them, or leaders, they're really useless. So we're just trying to make sure people have tools to understand what they can do to help.
And as part of this process, in terms of creating some content around the new program, in terms of trying to help educate folks, is a brand new podcast called the Workplace Mental Health podcast with Dr. Bill Howatt. And I've had the pleasure of being the interviewer for the new show. We have actually, as we record this, just wrapped up recording the first season, which is specifically focused on this, on Crisis Ready, and then there's more to come with that show. So watch this space, listeners. There will be links to the new show, I'm sure, within the show notes here. So check that one out too on your podcast player of choice. Okay, so now I'd like to ask, why is this new program timely? What I mean by that is, folks can feel stresses and pressures at any time in their lives, and there are a whole bunch of factors, and we've gone into many of those in the new podcast season. But what I'm talking about here actually are some of the newer, bigger contextual factors. We've got wars going on around the world. We've got economic stresses. We've got certain politicians who are in place who are shaking things up for other countries. These are all things that they press upon us in our personal lives, and we take that into the workplace, right? And some of those seem to be a lot bigger, maybe even existential at times than just a few years ago. Paint a picture of that.
I think you actually nailed a great word. What an existential crisis is facing the potential of your own demise. And when you start thinking about it, we haven't fully recovered from the pandemic, many people. The full fallout of this is not over yet. It's like we know after other types of like plagues and pandemic, there's a lag period, and then things catch up. The challenge is that for myself, as someone who works in workplace mental health and still carries licenses to see clients and need and all that kind of stuff, is it's helpful to keep in context what's going on. You see, we've been under a lot of stress for several years. The pandemic changed the landscape. That was a big crisis, not just for one area, but for the planet. In my 60 years, that's the big one. I mean, I wasn't in Korea, I wasn't in Vietnam, but I was in Ottawa by myself during a pandemic. Just moved here. So I dealt with my issues too. And if I didn't have Blink, my bulldog, my trusted buddy below me, I probably would be, I would have made it, sure, but you get my point. You come out of the pandemic and war starts. And then other civil unrest starts, and other war starts, and geopolitical. So there is no shortage of, the interest rates, inflation, pressure. So there's been all kinds of macroeconomic stressors. So if you think about it, why I think it's timely is what crisis really is when people's resources are overwhelmed and a situation's outside the realm of normal or coping capacity. So if you think about it, crises could be you're stressed out because you're late and someone cuts you off and someone has a reaction. For that person being cut off is a crisis. It's a mini crisis, but some people move into road rage because they can't regulate their calm. You drop something and you'll see, and what's the point being is if your battery is really low, and life is really hard and your adversity load's really heavy, your tolerance decreases. I'm finding people's tolerance is shorter now. And I'm finding people are a little bit more acting out now. And there's more emotion now. Violence in some areas has increased. Car thefts has increased. Food insecurity. So all this stuff's happening outside workplaces, but then it comes in and there's a general stress that a lot of people are dealing with. And my sense is one of the really important things for us to keep in mind to kind of land this question for you is that there is no clarity when all this is going to end. And so the unknown is another problem. And so that, to me, Bill, what's happening is people are under a lot of pressure now. And that pressure is going to create more emotions. It could create more mental health issues, online gambling, pathological online gambling has gone from 3.5 in Canada up over 6 now. Like, people are looking for different ways to cope. the stress. And so my belief system is the timings now. Employers that have HR professionals, OHS committees, workplace mental health leaders, we're wise to give people tools to get ready to deal with these situations. And if we don't, give them practical tools. They don't need theory. They need practical tools like CPR, bang, bang, bang. Simple things that can help them move towards the help. That's what we're trying to do. But it's your question's a big, there's a lot of stuff, man.
So the pandemic was very difficult for everyone. One silver lining that at least we were talking about in 2022, 2023 a lot, into 2024 as well, was one silver lining from the pandemic was that people were more willing to be open and vulnerable with people and check in with them. Use that term, check in. You know,
Yeah.
how are you doing? How are you doing? How are you feeling?
Yeah.
Being honest about where you're at in terms of your mental health. Do you think it was still there? Are we closing off again?
I think we've had a slip. I think it's. I think what's happened is we haven't figured out fully that mental health is no different than physical health. And what I mean by that is exercise, diet, rest, relaxation are what your nervous system needs for physiological health. If you don't pay attention to what you put in your gut, you're not paying attention to how that'll impact because your gut's where your neurotransmitters are made that will impact how you feel. If you don't have any purpose and you don't feel good, like it's really good mental health is learning how to feel well when you feel unwell. Like taking care of the car, your exercise, diet, rest, relaxation, that's great, but you got to know where you're driving to. And if you're going to work just for a paycheck versus purpose, or you're just trying to survive versus thrive, then there's a lot of folks are just trying to survive. So they don't have as much room. Their error, it's kind of like your cup's over full. There's a lot more people, their cup's almost overfilled with stress, worry, challenges, and that's creating more reactivity. And if we're not paying attention to the consequences of all of this stuff, it kind of creates a ripple effect. It can increase. It can impact families at home. It can impact the workplace. It can impact employees' quality of life and experience. And so it's interesting, when I listen to myself talk about this, it's a big spider web, right? But at the end of the day, Bill, I'm not convinced yet. In 2025, the average CEO, not some do, but the average CEO or leader understands that the emotion, all we're really talking about is how people feel, is that we're measuring it and making it a priority, and we're holding people accountable. Just be simple as this, is just to be kind, to be civil, to have disagreements and arguments. That's fine. We all have a bad day. I'm very capable of being short too, probably like other people. But is being mindful of what we want to aspire to be versus what we are, and have guidance and support to get to where we're going. And I still think we're too busy doing, and we're not paying enough attention to taking care of taking care of people enough where they're thriving enough. I'm hearing lots of people have great activity, but they're confusing activity with outcomes. Right? I'll end with this. Allopathic medicine, we've been talking about 100 years. Obesity, type 2 diabetes, cancer, those things still continue to rise. But so all of a sudden now we start this conversation around workplace mental health during the pandemic. Some of it was a little bit of a fad. But I think people confuse, well, we do that. We have EAP. Oh, we have benefits. That's supports. That's emergency. That's not prevention. That's not taking care of the employee experience. That's not paying attention to every interaction. That's not holding the environment accountable for what the experience is. And that's really what will matter.
Just very briefly, because I want to then switch to focus more on the role of the leader. But we in on this show we do try to offer practical takeaways for our listeners, and you are the guy to ask. If I haven't got the training, I haven't been through a course such as Crisis Ready, are there still one or two things that I can notice about myself if I allow myself to do that, that tells me that I'm in risk of becoming mentally ill, for example?
Yeah, and I would use the words versus mentally ill to be overwhelmed or not. So I'll give you an example. If you chronically are waking up every day at 4 a.m. in the morning, you can't sleep, and your brain is running all the time. If you're losing your appetite, if you're not enjoying things like, let's say I like playing basketball, but now I'm not playing basketball, I'm sitting home. I'm isolating myself from other people. I'm spending more time alone. I'm starting my internal dialogue, which we call our parrot, starting to say, your life's no good. I'm no good. It's never going to change. Because the key to good mental health is learning how to control the parrot in your head. Your brain says stuff, doesn't mean it's true. You have anywhere between 30 to 60,000 thoughts a day, depending on who you read or how active your brain is. So all the things that automatically generate in your unconscious brain is not necessarily factual. Your frontal lobe, and you have to have objective. So if your thinking is, and then you're spending a lot of time emotional, or you can't sleep, or you're agitated, or irritable, or reacting, those are all reasonable for someone that's stressed. That doesn't necessarily mean that you have a mental illness. Like if I told you how many patients I've seen over my 40 years that their wife left them after 20 years, took the dog, took the money, took this, and I see them a month later, and they're all stressed to the gourd, and they're not working, and they're not feeling good, and they might be that doesn't mean they have a mental illness. That just means they're overwhelmed. And so I think what happens is we sometimes don't understand depression, anxiety are very good emotions. They serve a purpose. It doesn't mean we're broken. They're really reasonable responses to how we're dealing with, because they're just an emotion, right? So to answer your question, I think it's self-awareness is important. Like when I was teaching in graduate school, you teach abnormal psych, all of a sudden people start diagnosing themselves. I'm very careful. It's degree of functioning versus symptom load. It's really the world life's no one's. I don't know why we have it in our society. Maybe you might have some wisdom. I'm from Canada and you live over in the UK. You might have different perspective. But somehow in my culture where I live, I think sometimes we have a bias that things are supposed to be good all the time. Versus if I look at an Eastern culture where they accept unpleasant emotion, misery is a part of the human condition. And I think sometimes we haven't taught people that life's hard and you're going to spend some time in unpleasant emotions, and that doesn't mean your life sucks. But I'm not sure many people got that lesson, Bill. So we're running away from emotions a lot.
Okay, now I want to talk about leaders, as I suggested I would do earlier on, and specifically the KPIs, or in fact the key performance behaviors. But what are some of those key performance behaviors of trusted leaders during a crisis, and how can HR and employee wellbeing professionals help to develop those behaviors?
Yeah, so it's interesting. One of the things I've been doing, Bill, is actually I created a program called Trusted Leader. And one of the things we teach in the Trusted Leader is very specific behaviors called foundational behaviors, daily behaviors, and on-demand behaviors. And one of the really, really good foundational behaviors for building trust that can help in dealing with challenging situations or conflict is creating an environment where it's okay for employees to have a point of view or even to debate with you. So one of the key performance behaviors I teach in that is, for example, if you were my direct report and we just getting to know each other, I'd say, okay, Bill, so there's going to be times where you and I are going to have debates or even arguments. So how do you want to argue? And Bill might go, well, what do you mean? I said, well, we're going to have arguments. We're going to have passionate debates. How do you want to do it? Because if we really both care, we're going to have to learn how to actually have differences of opinion. Now, what's important is when we have difference of opinion, we got all these neurochemicals, all this emotion wanting, some of us want to win. But the reality is a debate about winning or is a debate about learning. Where do you want to start from? Because a possibility is I could be wrong. See, a good leader has the humility to know just because they have a thought doesn't mean it's always facts or they're always right. That's where it takes some humility. Why you think about, great people that, great writers, Jim Collins, Good to Great, humility, number one attribute for, great leaders. So if you start thinking about it, that's a skill. And then who gets to start the argument? Well, are you just the leader or is it the employee comes to start? And then the employee asks, how do you want to argue? And you start to learn how to practice to have interpersonal dances. That could be from giving feedback. Arguing and feedback are different than correcting behavior. Like if Bill is my direct report and he really, really cares about me, and I have some implicit bias and I actually said something that may be colloquial or a colonial term or something I was outside my level of awareness that oppresses someone else. Bill really cares about me and we have a trusted relationship. Well, Bill will come up to me and say, Bill, are you aware of what you just did? And go, what was that? And I go, you just said this and this. And for that person, that could probably mean this. I recommend not. Well, he just corrected my behavior. And defending it, that's not really the point if I have a trusted relationship. So that can help us navigate things quickly so we can move through it. Now, is it always smooth and easy? No. But it's getting that foundation in place will help you during the hard times. I find too many people just kind of have a fake dance and they don't have an authentic dance.
Let's talk about the legals. What are the legal obligations of employers when it comes to creating a safe and respectful workplace? Forget everything else for a moment. From a legal perspective, why do companies need to take this more seriously?
Yeah, it depends on where you're at. Most states, provinces, countries that are in our world, like the UK or Canada, etc., there are going to be some requirements that employers have a duty to protect workers. And so in Canada, I'll speak to that because where I'm at, the province of Ontario, every employer under the occupational health and safety would have a certain obligation around creating a physical safe place, as well as protecting employees from bullying, harassment, as well under human rights, protecting them from discrimination. So employers now are becoming clearer on their obligation to protect employees. But what's also really important is that some countries are going to another level. Like you look where Australia is very progressive. They're starting to look at the environment from psychosocial factors that could be contributing to employee stress and putting obligation that employers measure what those factors are. And if those factors are becoming hazards, so one way to think about it, think about work demand. If it's okay, it could be a charge. And if it's not, and it's overwhelming, it could become a drain. And if that's starting to create harm, that's moving to people to like burnout or fear or other things that are creating harm to themselves or others, and if an employer doesn't do something, there could be some responsibilities, starting to see some, more legal action happening around that and more conversation. So what's happening, I would say, what I'm going to call, a kind of a Western North American, there's obligations that employers. Now, the teeth, does the employer follow through? That's a learning curve too. So you can have policies and you get an obligation, but you also have to have the teeth where you're following through with consequences if you don't. So the government can create a policy to saying, hey, employees have a right to disconnect from work, but if no one's enforcing it, then that can actually become a harm. to employees. So employers are, yes, they're getting responsibilities. There's a regulatory piece where you can be held accountable. But I also think there's also employers are starting to, there's a three-legged stool happening. It's regulatory accountability, there's the financial business case, and it's also maximizing human potential. Like that, you want people to perform and you want them to learn and grow. It's kind of like a lawn. You got to water it. You gotta take care of it some, or it's not going to flourish. So I think there's more movement what employers are taking on as obligations and then taking on as opportunity in this conversation. And I find that it's not all just one now too.
Oh, I like that. Obligations and opportunities. I like that. Okay, so imagine you've got an organization and leadership have bought in to the fact that they need to have the training to be crisis ready. Great, yeah. They get it. But what are some of the challenges that those organizations might face when trying to implement trauma-informed practices, and how can they overcome them?
Well, I think it's like anything. It's there's awareness, accountability, and action, regardless of what you're doing. So getting a concept, becoming aware of it, first of all, you need to know why. Then you need to understand whether it's trauma-informed or anything. What can you do? And how do you do it? And I think what happens is not only giving people the information, the knowledge, and the skills, which we do in Crisis Ready Workplace, but it's also, I think, a big barrier is giving people time to practice. If you think about it, occupational health and safety, many organizations will have a safety moment or a safety tip, or they'll do audits, they'll do reviews, they'll do check-ins, because they know that it's important to make sure the lineman that's going up the pole, or woman or other, that they have their helmet and gear and everything safe. Well, they do that. Well, what do we do too often in psych safety or workplace mental health? We did an assessment, or we went to a program, or our leaders were trained. What's often a barrier to success is building in measurement and time for practice. And excellence, in my mind, requires repetition, practice, measurement, and habit development. And unfortunately, this is not a B12 shot. Whatever you're trying to give someone, I go to a beautiful, one-day workshop on trauma-informed workplace, that's good. But if you don't correct for the forgetting curve, by next Thursday, a week later, 85% of it's gone. Because there's so much information and there's so much to learn. I'm so, how do I put this? I'm so pro training and development. I think it's so important. But I'm so concerned for some of my big clients that they don't build in their budget the training piece and the practice piece. So they lose millions of dollars, if you look at a bunch of organizations, just doing almost a compliance check the box versus what's our competency-based model. And I think that's what really more employers want. They want the competency, not just the activity.
Well, fortunately, my understanding is that the Crisis Ready content is recorded. So if you are forgetting 85% after a week, you can go back and have another look once you've signed up. There we go. Dr. Bill, before we wrap up for today, how can our listeners connect with you? And of course, how can they learn more about the new Crisis Ready program?
Yeah, thanks very much, Bill. www.crisisready.c. The course is Crisis Ready Workplaces. You can look at HR News Canada, where you'll find Todd's good work, or HR Law Canada, as well as www.howatthr.com.
And in addition to that, I will include a link to the new podcast with Bill and Bill, the two Bills, and so you can listen to that too and learn even more. Dr. Bill, I think this is like the third or fourth time you've been on this show now. It's always a pleasure. So thank you very much for being my guest. And listeners, until next time, happy working.
Thanks for listening to the HR Chat Show. If you enjoyed this episode, why not subscribe and listen to some of the hundreds of episodes published by HR Gazette? And remember, for what's new in the world of work, subscribe to the show, follow us on social media, and visit hrgazette.com.